Hey y'all, it's Rick here with Uncommon Communion. Happy Sabbath. And yes, I am recording as opposed to writing. Familiar readers or regular readers will remember that as much as possible on Sundays, I like to reflect on the liturgical readings. And especially if they are stories that are evocative and have art, I like to include the visuals, the art as well. Well, tomorrow's story, or today, because it is Sunday as I am recording this, today's story in the liturgical gospel is not that artistically powerful. It's a great image. I love the image, but there's not a lot of art on it. So I felt like it would be more significant and hopefully useful for me to do a verbal as opposed to a written today. Well, regardless, let's begin as we always begin by recognizing, realizing, remembering, celebrating, and affirming that we are always and everywhere in the holy presence of the more and each other. So, the liturgical gospel for the 18th Sunday after Pentecost is another story from Luke. And we are basically going through Luke's gospel at this point of the Pentecost season in order. Now, we're not reading every chapter or every verse of every chapter. We're skipping a little bit, but we are basically on the road with Jesus. He's made the turn towards Jerusalem, and he is showing and instructing his followers about what it means to pick up their cross and follow him, right? As he nears what will be his death and resurrection in his passion in Jerusalem. So today's story is a healing story. It is a miracle story, but I think it's much more. And I want to read it to you from something that I usually quote from in writing. It's the First Nations, it's the indigenous translation of the New Testament, the First Nations version. And this is how the translator, translates this little story. And it is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 17, and starts with verse 11. On his way to Village of Peace, Jerusalem, Creator sets free, Jesus, took the path following the border between High Place, Samaria, and Circle of Nations, Galilee. He went into a small village where 10 men with a skin disease came across his path. They kept a respectful distance from him and called loudly, "Creator sets free! Honored one!" they pleaded. "Have pity on us!" Creator sets free, Jesus, looked at them and said, "Go to the holy men and show yourselves to them." They did what he said, and as they were on their way, they were healed. One of the 10 men, when he saw what he was healed, returned to Creator sets free, giving loud praise to the Great Spirit. He then bowed down to honor Creator sets free and offered him thanks. This man was from the high place, Samaria. Creator sets free says to those who were watching, "Were not 10 men healed? Where then are the other 9? Was the only one who returned to give thanks and honor to the Great Spirit an outsider from high place?" Then he said to the man, "Stand up and be on your way. Your trust in me has healed you." So, again, at face value, it is a wonderful healing miracle. These 10 men who have leprosy, which was regarded as really one of the worst afflictions that a person could have in Jesus's time. Now, keep in mind, it is probably not exactly the kind of leprosy that we have today, which I believe is called Hansen's disease. It was really more of probably eczema or some kind of a skin lesion. It just, was something today that might be treated pretty routinely. But in Jesus's time, there was great mindfulness and care about contamination. and sinfulness. And if you were afflicted with a skin or any kind of visual deformity or disease or something that was soiling you, so to speak, you would become unclean and impure. And one of the things about lepers in Jesus's time, and you hear that in the story, is that they were required to stay apart from the rest of the community. And whenever somebody passed, even within a certain radius of them, not even that close, it seems, they had to shout out, unclean, unclean, to notify the, you know, ostensibly clean passerby that if they got too close to the lepers, the unclean ones, they themselves would be contaminated. And in Jesus's time, there was a remedy for this would be spiritual or ritual contamination. There was a remedy, but it was time consuming and sometimes expensive, and it just wasn't that convenient. It was much better to not become impure or unclean in the first place. So again, what we see here are these lepers following the rules, right? They seem to be very aware of the rules because they call out from a distance, right? And Jesus looks at them, doesn't say that Jesus touched them, interestingly enough, because there are other places, especially in Mark's gospel, where Jesus is doing a lot of touching with healing. It says Jesus spoke to them and he says, go into the holy men and show them yourself to them. And in this translation, it actually has a little sidebar that says tribal law, which would be, again, the Jewish law here, of course, instructed that a person healed of a skin disease must be pronounced ceremonially clean by a holy man. So they were not fully clean, even if they were healed. It does say that on their way they were healed, but they weren't going to be certified until they followed the rule and went to these outside holy men, which we would call rabbis or the scribes and the Pharisees and so forth. So what again is interesting here is that 9 of them seem to go on their way, and this one turns back. And what does he do? He bows down, gives reverence to Jesus, and offers him thanks, right? A humbling gesture that is so simple and yet so powerful, that sign of gratitude. And it is not lost on Jesus, and he seems to make a point of this to whomever the audience is. And again, we can presume that it's his disciples and those who are following him, but also probably to, passersby, to a crowd, to, people who have just gathered, who may know something about Jesus, but not necessarily following him, or maybe even skeptical of him. Jesus says, were there not 10 men healed, right? I mean, he's asking kind of an obvious question. And he says, where are the other 9? Like, what happened to them, right? And then he underscores this and he says, was the only one who returned to give thanks and honor to the Great Spirit, an outsider from Samaria. Now, there's a lot I can say about Samaria, but this is really the upshot. And we are very biased when we think about Samaritans, right? Because there is the Good Samaritan. And in our culture, in our lexicon, a Good Samaritan, of course, is good, right? A Samaritan, if you say the word Samaritan, of course, the word good has to come in front of it, right? In Jesus' time, it was very different. There were 2 main parts of the Jewish Palestine. It was Palestine was the name of the Roman occupied territory, but it was Galilee in the north and Judea in the south, and in between was this region of Samaria. And the Samaritans, bless their hearts, as you might say, were not seen as fully Jewish in the same way that the Galileans and the Judeans understood themselves to be. And a big part of that, was because rather than the temple being the focal point of worship for the Sumerians, which is where the focal point of worship was, of sacrifice and worship for the Galileans and the Judeans, was the temple, and the Samaritans, that was not. So there was bias and bigotry and even some hostility because, again, they did not see each other as fully authentic. So when we see these key Samaritan characters popping up, we see the Samaritan, of course, the Good Samaritan. We see this Samaritan. We see the Samaritan woman at the well in John's Gospel. We need to pay attention because these are people who, like the outcast, and again, these lepers are outcast, who, like the outcast to the society, the Samaritans are outcasts, the others, right? Who to the religious leaders and to the culture that Jesus was a part of. So Jesus upholding these people, calling them good, Jesus underscoring the fact that it is only the Samaritan who comes back and says, thank you. And he says, truly, he says at the very end, he says, stand up and be on your way. Your trust in me has healed you. Now, does that mean that the other 9 weren't healed? We don't know. We don't know what the story is. But this man, something is different because of the gratitude, because of the trust, because of the faith that he shows. So I want to end here with just a thought about gratitude and how vital it is. Because what gratitude keeps us away from is a sense of entitlement. And entitlement is a place where many of us want to hang out. We think we deserve something. We think we are entitled to it for whatever reason. Maybe it's because of our skin color. Maybe it's because of the money we have, or the job we have, or the status we have. We think we are entitled to something. And of course, we are, I believe, and it has been the Declaration of Independence that there are certain unalienable rights. We do deserve to be treated with human dignity and kindness and be humanely treated, right? And yet, many walk around with this sense of entitlement, which is the opposite. It is the poison of gratitude. Or in other words, gratitude is the antidote for entitlement, because entitlement leads nowhere good, right? When we think we are entitled to something, it leads to resentment, right? And resentment leads to ugly, ugly places, right? It leads to those places where we think we deserve something and we're going to do whatever it takes to get that. And if we don't get it, we're going to be just jerks about it, for lack of a better word. And what gratitude realizes, and what the man in the story realized, is that everything is gift, right? I didn't create this world. You didn't create this world. And yet here it is. I didn't bring myself into life, nor did you. And yet here we are, right? And there's so many more things that we can say. And the only response, and this is the response that Jesus wants, and this is the response that, quite frankly, I think a lot of so-called Christians walking around also could adopt more of. All of us could. That sense of gratitude, that sense that none of us deserve anything, really, and everything we have is gift. And I don't know about you, but the best thing to do with the gift is to share it, right? Because if we hoard it, it goes away and it turns to dust, basically. All right, y'all, this has gone a little bit long, but I hope this story is one that encourages you, the hope and the gratitude to persevere, to be resilient during this difficult time. And I'll tell you what, each week brings new surprises, new horrors, new insanity. And this week ahead probably will have much of that. But what it also will have is grace and beauty and love. And all of that should lead us to be more kind, to be more generous, to be more loving. All right, y'all, let's close with the serenity prayer. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things that we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thy will, not ours, be done. All right, y'all, blessing and good. We'll try to write for Sunday into Monday. Be bold, be gentle, and most of all, be well.